Hello everybody, it's Uncle Matt, and I'm here to read you another bedtime story. And today's bedtime story is Ladybug Garden by Celia Godkin. This book was copyrighted in 1997. The gardener looked all around his garden, and he liked what he saw. There were hardy vegetables, brightly colored flowers, and fruit trees that made the air smell sweet. There were many kinds of insects in the garden, too, ladybugs and wasps, bees and butterflies, aphids and ants. The gardener thought about all those insects. He knew that bees and butterflies helped the garden grow. As they flew from flower to flower drinking nectar, they picked up a fine yellow dust called pollen, which the flowers produced. By carrying pollen from one flower to another, the bees and butterflies help the flowers produce seeds for new plants. Though the butterflies were helpful, the gardener knew that their young, the caterpillars, were not. They often damaged plants by eating the leaves. The ants and wasps in the garden were harmful in one way but helped in another. They sometimes nibbled on ripe fruit before the gardener got around to picking it, but they also helped the garden by eating harmful insects. There was no question about the aphids, though. The gardener knew they were bad for the garden, because they sucked plant juices and spread diseases. He didn't know much about the bright red ladybugs, but he thought they were special and was very fond of them. One day, the gardener had an idea. If I get rid of the bad insects, he thought, my garden will be perfect. So the next day, the gardener sprayed the red fruit trees, the vegetables, and the flowers. He used a spray gun filled with bug killer. As the gardener sprayed the poison, the bees, ants, and wasps hid in their nests to protect themselves. But the ladybugs didn't have any nests, so they flew away in a great red cloud. The aphids didn't have nests either, but without wings, they couldn't fly away. They hid under the leaves in the garden. When the gardener finished spraying, the aphids crept out of their hiding places and went back to work. Many of them died from the poison, but others survived. The aphids sucked the juice out of leaves and tender plant stems. Some of the juice passed through their bodies and turned into a sweet, sticky liquid called honeydew. Soon it seemed there were more aphids than ever before. As they multiplied, they sucked more and more plant juice. It wasn't long before the plants in the garden were coated with sticky honeydew, which ants love. The ants milked the aphids by stroking them with their feelers. This made the aphids squeeze out honeydew, which the ants then licked up. There were so many ants going to get honeydew from the aphids that the gardener began to see ant trails all over the garden. The bees in the garden liked honeydew too. It was easier for the bees to lick honeydew from the plants to make their honey than it was for them to go from flower to flower collecting nectar. Because there were fewer flowers now, the plants had become too sick to make more flowers because of the damage the aphids had done. With fewer flowers, there were fewer butterflies visiting the garden, but there were still many caterpillars. They stayed in the garden eating leaves until they grew big enough to turn into butterflies and fly away. Not only were the plants too sick to make flowers, the fruit trees were too sick to produce much fruit. Wasps buzzed angrily about, fighting over what little fruit there was. And all the while, the aphids continued to multiply. There were so many, in fact, that they were crowded together on the plants, fighting one another for food and space. Many plants were so covered with honeydew that they grew moldy. The gardener knew that something was terribly wrong. The garden had few flowers, the fruit trees had little fruit, and the vegetables were shriveled up and wilted. The plants were covered with aphids. There were ant hills and ant trails everywhere. The wasps were becoming a nuisance, and the butterflies had all but disappeared. Even the bees' honey tasted strange because they had made it from honeydew instead of nectar. The gardener didn't know what to do. He could see that spraying with poison had been a mistake. He understood now that all the life in his garden was linked somehow, that the plants and insects depended on one another to survive. What about ladybugs? A friend suggested. What about them? The gardener asked. Ladybugs are nature's way of controlling aphids, the friend replied, and she gave him an address from which to order a supply. When the box of ladybugs arrived, the gardener took it out to the garden, opened it, and left it in a shady spot under a tree. One by one, the ladybugs flew or crawled out of the box. Soon they were all over the garden. The ladybugs ate all the aphids they could find. They ate and ate and ate and ate, and after a while the garden began to recover. The plants grew stronger and healthier. When the following summer came, the gardener looked all around his garden. Once again there were hardy vegetables, brightly colored flowers, and lots of sweet, ripe fruit. The butterflies were back, the ants and wasps had settled down, and the bees were making delicious honey. Everything was as it should be. The gardener smiled. He had always known there was something special about ladybugs. And that's all the time we have for Uncle Matt's bedtime story. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.